Okay.
I've been asked to tell about the Hoeflin family and also my own. My name is Viola Hoeflin Rister. Now, in 1870, my grandfather built a log cabin on what is known as Holland's Grove. It is still known as Holland's Grove. This was the birthplace of my father, Louis A. Hoeflin. His father, who built the cabin, was Andrew Hoeflin, and his mother was Elizabeth Mailing, both born in Baden-Baden, Germany. In later years, their home was located in Washington, where the Methodist Church Annex has been built. Grandpa Hoeflin was born in 1835 and died in 1913. He was a veteran of the Civil War and became blind as a result of gunpowder in his eyes during the war. Andrew is the Hoeflin family name, and there has been an Andrew in every generation. There is also a tombstone in the Washington Glendale Cemetery bearing the name of Andreas von Hoeflin, with his birth date, 1814, and his death in 1881. In Germany, the name was von Hoeflin, but the family dropped the von. However, I thought the von sounded just great with Viola. So in school, I sometimes signed my name Viola von Hoeflin. This worked very well until one of our high school teachers seated each student according to his last name, and I was seated in the back row, much to the outrage of some of the kids in the front seat. So that ended the von. You may stop again, possibly. Our family home was located at 203 Market Street. There were 7 of us children, 5 girls and 2 boys. My sisters, actually, I was the oldest, but next came Esther and Mary Evelyn, who was a great friend of Caroline Zinser. And they both made their homes in Laramie, Wyoming. Then there was Victoria Campbell. She hated that name Victoria, so she called herself Terry, and we still call her Terry. And then there was Louise, and she was Dolly, still Dolly, who lives, and these 2 sisters live in Miami, Florida. My brothers are Andrew R. Hoeflin, Peoria, Illinois, and Louis A. Hoeflin, Jr., Riverside, California. We were a musical family, and most of us sang in the church choir at one time or another, as well as in the chorus of colleges and school groups, not to mention while doing the dishes at home or gathered around the piano. We all sang, and my mother also. One time, all 5 sisters were asked to sing for a program at the City Building. And when we came in together, the audience applauded, and we were so surprised we almost forgot to sing. My father operated the hardware store for many years in the building now owned by the Herbst Company. Later, he became a real estate broker. Both of my parents were born and raised in the Hollands Grove area. Dad was born in 1872 and died in 1952. My mother, Flora Kyle Hoeflin, was born in 1876 and died in 1962. All the children are living now except my dear sister, Mary Evelyn, who died in 1973 of a cancer. My mother, Flora Hoeflin, was instrumental in the establishment of the Washington Library. It had been her dream for many years. She felt that Washington needed a library, and she talked to many people about it. Among those who became interested were Mrs. Harriet Zinsser, mother of Caroline, Miss Nora Weeks, and she was the mother of Bernice, we'll mention her later, and Mrs. Carrie Urban. These four women worked to interest the Mothers Organization in this project. In 1924, the first discussions were held by the club. These went on until 1927, when the City Council agreed to furnish a room in the city building for the purpose of starting a public library. After much work by the women of the Mothers Club, the library was officially opened on June the 15th, 1927. Miss Bernice Weeks was the first librarian. She was paid $1 for each of the times that the library was open, and that meant that the $3 because the library was open 2 afternoons and 1 evening. The first library board consisted of the following members: Mrs. Viola Hoeflin, Mrs. Harriet Zinsser, Mrs. Nora Weeks, Mrs. Ada Renfer, and Mrs. Anna Goddard. After several years, the library became too small for the Mothers Organization to handle, and the City Council was approached with the question as to the feasibility of turning the library over to the city. After some time, this was done. The library outgrew the room in the city building, and eventually a new Washington Public Library was built on the corner of Walnut and Elm Street and has become an important part in the advancement of the cultural growth of the community. Mrs. Margaret Harvey became the new librarian and continued until her death in 1958 as the librarian for 24 years. When the new library was first opened to the public in the new building, there were 12,000 volumes, serving an area of approximately 1,200 people. The staff included 4 persons. The library was open 40 hours a week. An addition of 5,152 square feet was added to the library building in 1970 at a cost of $116,037. The basement of the new addition was made into an attractive children's department in 1972. At this time, Mrs. Mildred Moyer became head librarian following Mrs. Herma Hammond's retirement. At that time, the library served the Washington Township with a population of 18,366. This comprises an area of 54 square miles, including the communities of Washington, Beverly Manor, and Sunnyland. Today, the volume of books is 35,260, with 19,955 people who use the library repeatedly. There are 15 persons on the staff now, and the library is open 52 hours a week. A branch library was opened in Sunnyland in 1974 and is still in use. I'd like to add a little about my own family. Lloyd Risser and I were married in 1920. We had been friends in high school, Lloyd was on the basketball team, and he would take me to the games. Not only that, but 3 other couples who were usually with us. Orva, Kern, and Tots White, Gladys Weeks, and Bill Danforth, and Lloyd and I. We always walked to school together, too. Miss Audrey Dykeman, one of our school teachers, called us the troubadours. I don't know what that means, but that's what she called us. Lloyd was a year ahead of me in school, and after his graduation, he went to college in Ohio. He was there for a year and then came home for my graduation, and also joined the Army. But the war was over shortly after that, so he really was never in the fighting. I went to Normal in order to get my certificate to teach school. And the following year, I was teaching, and Lloyd went to Louisiana. That was Lake Charles, Louisiana, and he farmed rice. It was a big place. The following June, Lloyd came home to my school, and my school was out. So on June 23rd, 1920, we were married. We went to Lake Charles, but in 3 years we came back to Washington and lived in the family home. Lloyd was on the city council for 23 years, longer than anyone had ever held that office. We were married for 51 years. In our early years, we had 3 children, 2 boys, Bob and Jim, and a daughter, Joy. And both of the boys were in the service, and so were my 2 brothers, Andy and Lou, I guess I'll say. And they are all in business and doing very well. That is my children that are, I have 2 children in California and also the one in Bloomington. Lloyd had 3 heart attacks, and the 3rd one took his life at the age of 72. Saddest day of my life. I have lived alone in the home place, 211 East Jefferson. Ever since. Well, and that was way down. See, there are houses there now, but there weren't then. And Lloyd always kept it in the barn, there's a great big barn down there. And we were going up to Dave Snell's in our car for some gas. And Lloyd, looky there, that looks like your truck, doesn't it? And he said, "It is my truck." Oh, he could hardly say it. He was so shocked. He knew on it had to be Bob driving that. And I wish I could touch it. And it was Lloyd's own fault. I never told him that either. But he always loved that Bob beyond words, And he would drive and take him. He was just a little kid. He'd hold him on his lap and let him do the driving. No offense to it, but that's what he did.
Dad did that.
And, of course, Bob, he just idolized Lloyd, So anyway, he saw us before we saw him. And there was a little boy that lived next door where Riders are now. And they had this kid same age as Bob. And how he ever got turned around, or however he was, I just can't think of myself. And, he had to go down kind of a little alley to get around the back to the barn. That truck was in that barn as straight as a poker, and he could drive good. He still does now, too. He's a marvelous driver. Good heavens. Going to be 60 years old. First day of October. My little boy.
Yeah, your firstborn.
Yes, sir, my first child. And I thought, oh, heaven. Lloyd could hardly breathe, and Bob had gotten that truck in there and up the steps and into their room. The boys had Bob and Jim had one room together. and separate beds, though. And here was Bob. I knew he was up there. And Lloyd went up and I saw him go up the steps. And oh, look. I just didn't know what was going to happen. And I could hardly stand it, see? And I could hear Bob just sort of sobbing to himself, see? That killed me, too, because I'm I can't stand it. And so I couldn't wait much longer. I was downstairs. I didn't know what was going on. And so up I go, and I just stand in the doorway. Never said a word. And Lloyd was sitting on the bed, and he had Bob. Bob was in bed, and he probably just pulled him over across on his arm. And Lloyd was holding him in his arm like that, and he said, all I heard, he said, Bobby, you could have killed yourself. Think of that. Or you might have killed someone else. Think how terrible. You'd have to carry that all the rest of your life. He's talking just as slow as that. And after he said a lot more, but those were the things. That's what he talked just as quietly to him. And he just held him up real close to him. And he said, now if you want to sleep a while, you just lay down and sleep. And he kissed him and laid him down with his head on the pillow.
Yeah.